Thank you. Well, if I may, I'd like to start by thanking the whole of the Spanish delegation, both in Brussels and in all the various ministries, for all their hard work. Because, as you can see, the outcome of Spain's rotating presidency of the European Union has been extremely satisfactory. And even though I'm quite sure that as a progressive government, based on the experience that Spain's had, there were other presidencies before me, and you'll realize that there's a lot of human capital that has to be invested in this work in all the various ministries and here too in the Spanish delegation. And without the teams and the leadership of the President of the Council and the President of the Commission and the Commission and Council teams, it wouldn't have been possible for us to do everything that we have achieved over the past 6 months. So I'd like to thank Ursula, Charles and their whole teams very much indeed for all their hard work and support over the past 6 months. In the Council over recent days, you'll remember that the first point, enlargement, well, on the 1st of July, I had the opportunity to go to Kyiv and meet President Zelensky and convey to him the fact that all the member states and community EU institutions are clearly resolved over the coming 6 months, as it was then, to be able to reach the historic agreement that we achieved yesterday, that is to open up negotiations with Ukraine, and not just Ukraine, but Moldova as well. And of course, the same goes for the Western Balkans and Georgia in particular, if they comply with the necessary conditions, that is. And so that was the commitment that we made on the 1st of July in Kyiv on behalf of all the European Union institutions and Spain. And this is just one of the historic chances, really. It just so happened that the opening of the negotiations to include Ukraine was approved under the Spanish presidency. Spain is not a founding member of the European Union. We joined back in the 80s. And of course, it's an even greater honor, that being the case, because it's not so much only it's not that the historical situation is the same, but there were many countries who wanted to join the European family for a long time, and ultimately it is possible for that to happen with the backing and assistance of the European Union institutions. On the multi-annual financial framework, as Charles and Ursula said, I believe that over the past 6 months we've done some work which has been very difficult, very complicated. It's really been quite painstaking, but I think we have managed to achieve one significant thing. We reached agreement among the 26 countries. There are 27 of us in the EU, and I'm confident that under the Belgian presidency, over the coming 6 months, it will be possible that Prime Minister De Croo will be able to achieve that agreement among the 27. I'm not sure whether it will be easier or more difficult than reaching agreement among the 26, but in any event, it will be up to him to bring about this very necessary update and revision of the MFF, as has already been pointed out. I don't really want to say any more over and above what Charles has said. I'd just like to thank all the member states for their support, and I would just add to what the President of the Council said, just one point which I think was broadly accepted by the member states, namely this. It's important that the Council reflects strategically on the southern neighbourhood. It's clearly apparent that we've had other geopolitical debates, but I believe looking at what's happening in the Middle East, and not only in the Middle East, I think that should compel us to look to the south as well and to have a far more strategic vision of what we're doing in the European Union, working together with many countries who are our allies when it comes to ensuring stability and economic stability in a very important area, namely the Mediterranean, a very important part of Europe. And as in my capacity as Prime Minister of a Mediterranean country, namely Spain, that's extremely important. I think we've managed to conclude on very important files, both in quantitative and qualitative terms. And I'd remind you that since the beginning of Putin's war in Ukraine, or even beforehand, we were beginning to feel in the pockets of our industries and households in Europe, we were feeling the consequences of the increase in energy prices, gas and electricity prices. And it had an impact on our families' purchasing bargaining power and on Europe's competitiveness as well. And what we've been able to do over the past few days is to reform the energy market. It required very thoroughgoing, intense debates. It involved a lot of discussion over many years as well, and I think that was one of the most important achievements of this presidency. And the same goes for the environment, critical raw materials, and the legislation on artificial intelligence. And looking at it from a particularly Spanish point of view, I would remind you of the important summit that we held in July here in Brussels with our allies from Latin America and the Caribbean, the SELAC summit, that is, where not only did we commit to a number of strategic investments in the Latin American and Caribbean continent, but we also undertook to finance and to foster the strategic relationship between the two blocs. That, I believe, is very important, because clearly these trade agreements have made some progress. Obviously, we would have wished to be able to complete on Mercosur, but we didn't manage to do that. But we did nonetheless sign an important agreement with Chile, which I'm sure will reaffirm and shore up this relationship. I'd also just like to mention the informal council, the informal summit that we held in Granada, where we looked at all the important points on Europe's strategic agenda, which will be taken forward under the Belgian presidency. So what we have yet to do, what lies ahead of us, as the President of the Commission said, I think the Migration and Asylum Pact is extremely important. Then there's a very important meeting of finance and economy ministers, the aim being to reach agreement on economic governance. I think that's highly relevant. It's very important that next year we are able to introduce new fiscal rules and new economic governance. And lastly, particularly bearing in mind that in Spain, it's very important to bear in mind that Romania is very important indeed, as is Bulgaria. And we hope to be able to ensure that by the end of the year we can enable them to join to the Schengen area. So I think that takes stock of what we've done in the course of our presidency. And could I end where I began? I'd just like to thank all the public officials and civil servants. Sometimes we're inclined to forget just how important the role that they play, just how professional and committed they are to the European cause. And fortunately this applies to the Spanish embassy, the EU institutions, both the Council and the Commission. So, dear Charles, dear Ursula, you've really done an excellent job of work, and I'd like to thank everyone who was involved, including those who work in the Council and the Commission.
We'll start with questions, and we'll go with Jorge.